Hi, friends. I hope everyone's doing well. As I was cleaning up my art studio, I noticed that my leftover scraps container was getting full. When this happens, I like to bring out a small art journal and challenge myself to create collages using some of these scraps. This is a 5-inch square art journal that I find is a good size for this purpose, so let's get right into the collaging sessions. Usually I'm mindful about pulling light, mid, and dark value papers. I like having all three of these values in collages because it helps with contrast and depth. I'm not going to stress about having all three values in these collages. My goal is to experiment and play and see what different color combinations and compositions I can create. I'm limiting myself with the scraps that I pull, but I'm giving myself some leeway to bring out paint and other marking supplies. I'm painting this ground, so I'm putting washi tape in the gutter of the journal and paper behind the page that I'm working on to protect the other pages. This is a very loose, relaxed collage session, so I'm dipping the 3/4-inch flat brush into the top and bottle for quick access. Also, this art journal is only 5-inch square, so there isn't a lot of ground to cover. This blue scrap will sit on top of most of the other scraps, so I won't be gluing it yet. It'll help me to map out the placement of the other scraps that will be under and around it. The good thing about this exercise is that you are limited to the scraps you pull. This constraint helps to create different collages with different color combinations and compositions. I really like this pink and green monoprinted paper. It's one that I'd like to replicate the next time I have a monoprinting session. You will continue to see me placing this blue scrap on top of the collage as I audition other scraps underneath it. I'm gluing down the pink and green scrap now because the purple scrap will be slightly overlapping on top of it. After the pink and green scrap was secured, I'm gluing down the purple one. The edge near the journal's gutter was torn. I decided to cut it straight, then reposition it so it'd be flush against the edge of the collage. I love the pattern of this dark teal scrap. I put too much paint on the gel plate, so that's why there's large puddles of paint. Initially, I thought it was a fail, but I like the texture now. It's a nice detail. I like this placement, so I'm going to glue it down now, then decide on the placement of the small pink and green scrap. I like how the small pink and green slightly overlaps the large blue scrap. I'm going to glue it down first, then glue the small pink and green scrap next. The collage looked a bit plain. Instead of adding more paint or paper, I decided to bring out this old box of oil pastels to add some marks. I thought yellow would be a good color to add since there's already yellow in the collage. I didn't want to introduce a new color. You can see that some of the black pastel rubbed onto the yellow, so it marked the collage. I'm okay with it since I'm playing. Next, I brought out a green pastel to add a few more marks. Again, there's already green in the collage, but a lighter value of it. Here's the finished collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out. It's not a color combination that I normally use. It has inspired me to try it again on a larger scale. I had an idea for this collage, so I'm being mindful of the papers pulled. As you can see, the papers are bright. Also, the papers are only light to mid-tone in value. I'm painting the ground with Blick's matte acrylic paint in black. I'm applying the paint right on the substrate with a 1-inch flat brush. The ground will be the only dark value in this collage. There will be a strong contrast since the ground is so dark and the papers are bright, light to mid-tone values. My plan for this collage is that the papers will have cut and torn edges. I think this will add an interesting detail. I love the shapes of the blue and the red papers. I call these shapes bridges and use them a lot when creating geometric collages. Also, the placement of all the papers will cause the ground to have interesting shapes as well, so the viewer will hopefully read it as a design element. As I collage, you can see how striking this color combination is with the bright colors against the black ground. It reminds me of a 1980s color theme. With this green paper, I'm starting to add a different shape. I mention this in almost every video. Varying of size, shape, and color helps to make a collage successful. Finishing up this collage with this light lavender paper, just adding it as a small accent shape within the blue bridge shape. Here's the finished collage. It's simple, but I think it's impactful due to the color combination. You can't go wrong with bright colors on a black ground. For this next collage, I wanted to use mostly lighter values. I pulled scraps of a book page, there's a red and white security envelope, and a metallic scrap. Not sure why I have that one. I rarely use metallic paint or paper in my collage practice. I tend to create collages that have an overall mid to dark look. I want to make more light value collages for a change of pace, also to see where it takes me creatively. I'm starting with the book page because it's light in value and to set the tone for this collage. Instead of using the scrap as is, I'm tearing it into 3 uneven pieces. Each one will be placed in different areas on the substrate and different orientations. These pieces will be the guide for the composition. To remind myself that the collage needs a bit of dark value to add contrast, I'm adding this dark green scrap now, being mindful of contrast, cohesiveness, and balance as I collage. Next, I wanted to add the metallic scrap at this early stage. If I don't like the way it looks, I could alter it before I get too far into the collage. Putting it right next to the book page reinforces the light value feel. Same can be said of gluing the red and white security envelope scrap next to the book page, but it's also next to the dark green for contrast. I like the shape of this mid-tone green scrap, so I left it as is. I just needed to decide on a pleasing orientation. I like how it curved up. It's good to think of the direction of the paper shape as well. It helps to direct the viewer's eyes around a collage. Same as this blue scrap, I wanted to use it as is. Just trim off one edge to straighten it so I wouldn't have to cut it off once it's glued down. If a scrap has an interesting shape, try to use it as is to see how you can work it into the composition. Continuing to add remaining scraps, I would consider both the orange scraps as mid-tone and values. I really like the shape of this other orange scrap. Part of me didn't want to use it, then I thought, why should I hold on to it? Instead, I cut a small piece of it to use in this collage. There's enough left over for another collage. Also, I can always replicate it next time I have a monoprinting session. I wanted to add some details, but not with paper or paint, so I brought out the box of oil pastels again. This color is ultramarine. Just adding simple marks. Even though I scribbled on top of the two book page elements, I still think this collage will have a light feel to it. I didn't want to add scribbles to this blank area, so I decided to add a small amount of metallic paper. Here's the finished collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out as well. Let's go on to the next one. I thought about the papers I wanted to pull for this collage, mostly blues and yellows. Initially, I wanted to create a collage that leans light in value. Spoiler alert, the design changes near the end. Once again, I started with the lightest value, which is this old graph paper. Then the scrap of security envelope that I would consider a light value as well. I only slightly altered it to keep its size and shape, which is large for this size substrate. I love the color and texture of this monoprinted paper. It looks like a ghost print, but I don't recall making it, so I'm guessing. This blue and yellow striped paper is one that I rarely use. It has a bold design that coordinates nicely with the other scraps. I'm being mindful on the size and the placement of the mid to dark value scraps at this point. I wanted to keep the mostly light value look. I chose a section of this blue scrap that I would consider mid-tone. I'm also being mindful of not lining up the scraps. This green security envelope is being glued slightly lower than the blue security envelope scrap. Again, keeping with the light design, I'm only using a small amount of this dark blue scrap. When I started to glue it down, I realized that I wanted to put another scrap slightly underneath it. I like the torn edge of this dark blue scrap facing downwards, so I didn't want to glue a scrap slightly overlapping it. I wanted to use more of this graph paper, again to keep the collage light leaning. At this point, the collage was almost finished, but it looked a bit boring to me. There wasn't anything unique about it. I decided to add paint, so I brought out this Naphthol red light. This color choice took the collage in a completely different direction. I wanted to go bold and add a big swipe of red from the top to the bottom of the collage. It took the collage from plain to bold. I like it much better with the red swipe of color. Here's the finished collage. The swipe of red took this collage from plain to bold. I like it much better than before. As you can see, I pulled mostly darker value papers, except for this bright yellow one. I'm starting with this paper since it's the lightest and brightest. Instead of using it as is, I decided to tear it up. It's a basic design principle to work with odd numbers. I decided to tear the paper into 3 different size elements and place each one in different areas on the substrate. I'm setting up the foundation for this collage by doing so. It helps to balance the collage since it's the only light and bright scrap. This black and white scrap is bold, but not as bold as the yellow. I didn't want to break it up into different elements, just trim off one of the white section, then glue as is. Then continuing to add dark value papers throughout the collage to balance it. I would consider the scrap as mid-tone in value. The placement of it next to the yellow scraps will add contrast with the torn black and white scrap. I'm not going to glue down that scrap yet. I want to figure out where I'm going to place most of the other scraps first. I decided to bring out paint because I felt the design wasn't quite interesting enough. This is Blake's matte acrylic paint in blue light. It's light but not as bright as the yellow paper, so it won't compete with it. Instead of a big swipe of color like Collage 4, I'm swiping small accents. To finish up the collage, I'm gluing down the black and white torn scrap. Here's the finished collage. I'm glad I added the light blue accents. I think it added an interesting detail to this collage. I'm pulling muted colors for this final collage. Even this turquoise scrap is considered muted. It's definitely not bright. Since I'm experimenting, playing around, I brought out this emerald green acrylic paint, and I'll be applying it using this 2-inch sprayer to spread it around the substrate. Once again, I'm applying the paint right onto the substrate. Looking back now, I realized that I applied too much paint. I wasn't getting the effect that I had envisioned. I'm started by gluing down this muted lavender scrap. Initially, I was thinking of creating a horizontal composition, but as you will see, it turned into a radiant composition, meaning the other scraps will be radiating out from the area near the muted lavender scrap. As this collage develops, you'll see the composition take form. Adding in smaller odd-shaped scraps like this purple plaid paper helps to make an interesting design. You can see the radiant composition clearly with the placement of this blue and orange striped scrap. See how one end is slightly overlapping on top of the muted lavender scrap, then angling up to the upper right corner. Here's the final collage. It was an unplanned composition change that took this composition in a different direction, from horizontal to radiant. I'm happy with the color combination along with the composition. This collage session using leftover scraps provided me with some good challenges and some good design ideas. I enjoy working with color combinations that I don't normally use, along with a composition style that I rarely use. Let me know if you'd like a video explaining different compositions. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch it. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care.